Ladies and gentlemen, it is an historic day. We now know that thanks to Democrats winning both Senate runoffs in Georgia, Democrats will have 50-50 in the Senate with Joe Biden in the White House, meaning that in any cases of a 50-50 tie in the Senate, the Vice President, Kamala Harris, will be allowed to cast the deciding vote. In practical terms, giving Democrats control of the Senate. What they will be able to get done, of course, will depend on maintaining all 50 Democratic senators united. And it's almost cliche at this point to say, but much of that will come down to, does Joe Manchin, the most conservative of the Democrats in the Senate from West Virginia, does Joe Manchin want to do many of the things that Joe Biden outlined in his presidential platform, or will Joe Manchin be the thorn in the side of the Democrats? Now, of course, there are other Democrats who in some cases may not want to go with the Biden idea. There are, at least theoretically, some Republicans who might. The prototypical example is that the constituents for Republican Maine Senator Susan Collins may be more to the left of the constituents for Democratic Senator in West Virginia, Joe Manchin. And these are more detail level discussions that we will have in the future. But what we do know is that in terms of the Kelly Loeffler incumbent versus challenger Raphael Warnock race, that one was called relatively early last night. Official calls starting around and after midnight. David Wasserman unofficially saying he had seen enough of the data to call it right around, I believe it was 9:30 p.m. Eastern, maybe 10 p.m. Eastern, something like that. And indeed, that race has been now called officially with Raphael Warnock ahead as of right now with 98% reporting by 1.2 percentage points. The other race is incumbent Senator David Perdue, a corrosive, vile, depraved influence on the U.S. Senate, who couldn't even be at the last rally that Donald Trump held for the Republicans because he was in isolation due to COVID exposure. That one has been called by some and not others, but it is over. And officially, as of right now, John Ossoff with 98% reporting as of this moment, leading by about half a point, roughly 17,000 votes. And that one is also one that some have called and some have not. And by the time you listen to today's show, you may see that it has also been called. So consider that under Donald Trump, who won in 2016, Donald Trump himself is ending up as a one-term president. And we are just moments now, and maybe by the time you listen to this, it will already be underway. We are moments now from the official counting of the electoral votes, January 6th, the absolute, I think, last date that Trump cultists were saying this is the date where Mike Pence can do something for us. But Trump becoming a one-term president, Democrats taking the House of Representatives in 2018 and maintaining control in 2020, although with a slightly smaller margin than they achieved in 2018, and Democrats also taking the Senate from Republicans in 2020. Back in 2017, the mathematical consensus was pointing to unlikely that Democrats can take the Senate in 2020, but 2022 is certainly a possibility. We now have a situation where Democrats, thanks, of course, to Kamala Harris in the White House, Democrats now will have control 50% plus that one tie-breaking vote in the Senate in 2020. And the possibility, again, depends on what you get done, but the possibility of expanding the Senate majority in 2022, although we are very much getting ahead of ourselves. Let's get this new president sworn in first and foremost. I was thinking, by the way, back to, remember that debate between Kelly Loeffler and challenger Raphael Warnock, where she endlessly, repetitively smeared or attempted to smear him as radical liberal. Remember this?
Radical liberal Raphael Warnock, radical liberal Raphael Warnock, radical liberal Raphael Warnock, radical liberal Raphael Warnock, radical liberal Raphael Warnock.
Well, as I tweeted last night, that's going to have to be modified to be radical liberal Senator Raphael Warnock to you, Ms. Loeffler. And of course, he's not really radical, and that was just part of the smear campaign. So in the end, we'll look at exit polls, and we already know that perspective on Trump versus Biden heavily influenced people's votes in Georgia. We know that there was some antipathy towards Donald Trump's attempts to steal the election that Joe Biden legally won, and legally won quite easily. I might add that did not work in Donald Trump's favor. And we'll have time to slice and dice the results. But in the immediate, the question for me becomes, listen, politics is not sport for me. Politics is, how does this affect people's lives? And unfortunately, there are many for whom it is merely sport, and that's really a shame. But we have a global 100-year pandemic. We have an eviction crisis. We have high unemployment. We've seen dramatic GDP reductions. We have businesses that are closed for good because of the virus. We've seen growing inequality, and there's this long, and climate is an urgent crisis. So there's this long list here of issues that Joe Biden is going to have dropped on his desk on day one. What can he do via executive order? What can he do legislatively in the first 100 days? Joe Biden talking yesterday about, if we get these seats, then we're looking at $2,000 checks. Well, are you? And how quickly can you get that done? Is that something we're going to do? I joined up yesterday during our broadcast of the Georgia results with Sam Cedar over at and Emma over at the Majority Report, and we talked about what is the trajectory here in terms of what's prioritized with regard to the virus. Sam saying, well, Biden should immediately invoke the Defense Production Act and get businesses making millions and millions of doses of the vaccine to accelerate that process, because the sooner we reach herd immunity, the sooner the economy is going to recover, and the sooner we can get back to dealing with a whole bunch of other issues. I think that that's something that's going to have to be looked at. But for those who, my last thought on this, I want to go to Republican reaction to this. But my last thought, and part of the conversation here we can't have until we actually have that January 6th today electoral vote count in the rearview mirror. I think a lot of us will just feel more ready to talk about the first 100 days of this administration and new Senate. But I think the cautionary message is all of these are moves in the right direction, but they're small moves. We're just we've gotten the ball back. We're starting to right the ship. As I've said before, the anti-intellectual, anti-science, delusional extremist, authoritarian when we want to be, but otherwise we pretend to be constitutional conservatives, that this entire paradigm on the right was built up starting with Ronald Reagan. You could argue it goes back even further to the civil rights movement and the sort of reaction to the civil rights movement in the late 50s and 60s. But let's, for our purposes today, say that the disinformation right that tries to win by lying to people and disenfranchising people, it sort of goes back to the Reagan era with the imaginary welfare queen who was sitting around popping out kids and making money off welfare to get a Cadillac. That was like the idea. She never existed. OK, Trumpism today and the Trump cult really started with that, and it took decades to build. And so my only point here, and then we'll move on because there's so much to talk about. My only point here is everything that's happened in the last month, 2 months, helps us to start righting the ship. But it would be unreasonable to imagine that a problem that took 40 years to create is going to be solved in 2 or in 4. And as I've said before, the only times that you get radically fast cultural change, because a lot of this comes down to culture, the anti-science culture, the hypocrisy culture of this stuff is all bad unless we want to do it, in which case it's good. That applies to debt, authoritarianism, etc. from the right. The only times we see radical changes to that type of culture are when you have a dictatorship come in. OK, so it's not realistic to think that a Democratic Senate and Joe Biden is going to dramatically change that in a 2 or 4 year period. So the focus has to be we get things done that we can get done, and we start to work on that culture. It's a big uphill battle, but there were two races and Democrats won both of them. You couldn't hope for a better result. Start your day and your new year off right with Just Egg, which is one of our sponsors. You've heard me talk about the importance of having a diet that is more heavily plant-based, and it's something I've done over the last few years. I've always loved eggs, so it's great that there is a delicious plant-based version of egg with all the protein of egg that Just Egg brings with it, but it's made from mung beans, so it uses 98% less water and causes 93% fewer carbon emissions than a conventional egg. And Just Egg cooks and tastes exactly like a conventional egg. I've tried it for omelets, scrambled eggs, French toast, banana bread, pad thai, anything you'd normally use eggs for. And I actually think if I cooked something for a friend without telling them about Just Egg, they wouldn't even know the difference. Find it in the egg aisle at your grocery store, on Amazon Prime now, or on Instacart. And they also have a frozen version perfect for breakfast sandwiches. Just Egg. Try it out.